know have read. It's been out for a while in hardback. It's had fantastic reviews. Can you tell us, for those who might not have been there or know about it, about Winchelsea?
Yeah, it's so lovely
Good
and
place.
strange to be back here, but sitting on the other side. I'm not sure. We did Kingfishers here, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a lovely event for that. So
As Kingfishers Catch Fire
Yeah,
is a fantastic bird book.
So Winchelsea is a novel that was a lot to do with me coming to this part of the world from London, that I'd lived there for all my life and came down here, and in the way that one does when you come to a place, you ask questions of your surroundings and of your of the world around you. And the Winchelsea started. I don't. Who has been to Winchelsea? Okay, it's a good local audience. It's actually it's a hell of a drive, having just done it. But you know, it's got the same atmosphere. There's a road in Winchelsea, and it's called Dumb Woman's Lane, and it leads down from the Udimore Ridge to the to the Breed Valley. And Dumb Woman's Lane, you know, immediately I'm like, right, what is this all about? Tell me this. What is the story behind this? And
You asked your dad.
I asked my grandfather,
Oh, yeah.
who used to spend a lot of time in Winchelsea, because he was an expert in Ford Madox Ford, who was an author who lived there, and he and I sort of tracked down the tale together, and the story was of the Hawkhurst gang, who were a smuggling gang, who effectively ran a kind of you know, I mean, it is basically, imagine The Wire or Peaky Blinders set in the 18th century, and you get some idea of this. They were an enormously sophisticated and incredibly powerful and very, very wealthy organised criminal gang, and they had an absolute kind of reign of terror over Kent, Sussex, Hampshire. They were as close to a kind of private army down here as you could possibly get. Now, the government tried to crack down on the Hawkhurst gang, and one of the ways they did that was something called the Act of Impeachment, which was introduced in 1746. And what that said was that if you gave information that led to the capture of one of the smuggling gang, then you would get an enormous amount of money. And so this immediately meant that there was jeopardy involved, that there was, you know, a sense that actually, you know, you could watch for these guys, and if you told the revenue, who were the customs officers, about it, then you would get a huge reward. Now, there was a run, so a carrying of goods by the Hawkhurst gang across the channel one night, and a lady who lived on this lane that I was talking about went and peached that there was a run taking place. And the next night, 5 horses drew up outside her house, and their hoofs had been muffled with sackcloth. And the men riding the horses had bee skeps, so like those old-fashioned beehives. They would use them as masks. They'd just kind of shove them on their heads. And they took her and they cut out her tongue. And that is why it's called Dumb Woman's Lane. And I heard that story, and I was immediately just sort of, right, this is extraordinary, because the smugglers I had in my mind were kind of poldark, and you know, these sort of
Kipling poem.
yeah, the Kipling poem. Although at least the Kipling poem theoretically takes place in the right part of the world. The thing that really sort of, I guess, set off a newfound sense of outrage at the fact that this story, which is absolutely of the Kent and Sussex coast, had been co-opted by Du Maurier, etc., to be something that was Cornish. In Cornwall, it was never more than a kind of hobby. And these kind of Robin Hoods of the sea who doled out the stuff they took to the local villages. Absolutely not true. These men were brutal, they were violent, they were awful.
And because people romanticise Escobar and the cocaine drug lords, don't they? And there's been recent awful things about the way they torture people. But customers regularly come in here, a lot of young men, sort of, we've got anything on Escobar, and why smugglers still have that romantic air?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's, of course, the Howard Marks book that was one of the, best-selling books of all time, which I never read it, but it looked like it would be awful. And yeah, of course, it is the sense of something that is outside the law, and it is the sense of something that's kind of stealing a march on organised systems, and we like outlaws, we like Bonnie and Clyde, we like the Sundance Kid. This is something that is attractive to us because it is illicit and it is dangerous and it is exciting, but at the same time it can be horrifying and exploitative and awful, and one of the parallels that I draw when I'm talking about the Hawkhurst gang is I think you very much have a kind of mirror of what they were doing here on the other side of the channel now in terms of people smugglers. So I think the organisation of the gangs, the networks through Europe and beyond, the complete impunity that they're able to act under, it's not these are there is a sense that people are taking objects of value from one side of the channel to the other with absolutely no care about who is impacted by that.
Your childhood then, lots of people have said the book is like Moonfleet updated. Was that your comfort book? Because as a kid you obviously...
I mean, it still very much is my comfort book, in that it's a book that I return to again and again because I think... so if people don't know...
1898? Has anyone read it here, by the way?
So Moonfleet
You've read it? I've really said I haven't. We do still sell it, actually.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Oh, it's a marvellous book, and if you've got children or grandchildren who are sort of, I would say, 8 to 13, 14, I think that's the kind of sweet spot. But actually, it is a novel that we should all read, because the thing I realised as I went back and read it to my kids is that it's a book of unbelievable complexity, and particularly the end of it, you can really tell when it was written, because it's just in the very early stages of modernism. It's at the very end of the 19th century. It's a smuggling tale, it's an adventure, and then the ending is absolutely heartbreaking because it does something, I love it when this happens in books. It skips forward 10 years, and I'm not going to give away the ending, but there's an extraordinary poignancy, and it does nothing that you would expect in those final 10 in the final pages when it has gone forward this 10 years, and it's just amazingly moving. So yeah, it was, along with there were a handful of others, The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, Dark is Rising. These were the books that absolutely, like, every bit as much as the sort of physical location in which I grew up, or the the school or the friends or all of that, this stuff was, my world was these books.
You've always seen through a place, as it were, you've always seen past Greg's to the history, as I like to put it.
I've never been in a Greg's.
Did you go with us? This is Waterstones. You grew up in Worthing, is that right?
Yep.
Sort of bingo halls and cinemas, I think.
Yeah, no, that's very, I mean, I think that you're talking about the more exciting elements of Worthing there. Had a beautiful cinema, actually, the Dome. But yeah, a very, it was sad in a way, and it was very much a backwater at the time. It's become very trendy now. It's become the new Brighton. So, but at the time, it very much felt like one of those seaside towns they'd forgot to close down, and yet it was only half of the experience, because of course the thing about being anywhere by the sea is that you've got this wild and extraordinary place just in front of you, and so the idea was that you know, when I felt constrained or when I felt in need of sort of that energy, then you would walk down to the sea and there would be crashing waves and there would be ships' lights far out, and there was a sense of, and I was a big I still am a big swimmer, and you know, I mean, it was not, talk about it being dirty now, it was not, it's much less clean back then, but it was still the sense of escape that you got by just throwing yourself into the channel was it was a really important part of my upbringing.
One amazing thing about the book, one of the amazing things, is Goody, the central character, who's very unusual. And I wondered if you'd, because it's so cinematic, whether you ever have crossed your mind of maybe an actress who might play Goody? Or...
Do you know what so the answer is yes, but the problem the book is being adapted for television by the BBC, which is really exciting.
It is,
and so we're actually going through exactly this conundrum at the moment.
When did you hear this?
They optioned it literally as it was published, so they'd seen a proof and they moved very, very quickly, and it's so.
So your wife then said, "Oh, that's good. All that time you spent in the shed."
Yes, there was definitely more. I had a few moments of what it might be like to be like a proper author.
Because you don't you find, I'm just fascinated, you do have to slightly justify to your family when you're going, and you're a sociable bloke, when you're just going and hiding away. And
yeah, I mean, yes, I do. And in fact, the way it's phrased in my household is, are you doing desk work or chair work? Because I have a nice comfy chair that I sit in when I'm writing.
Right.
But then if I'm doing journalism or the stuff which actually pays the bills a bit more, then that stuff I do sitting at my proper desk.
You don't go out to a cafe to write the fiction then?
No, I find I used to when I was in London. Firstly, I now live in the countryside and there aren't any cafes that close to me, but also I was aware that I would often write performatively in cafes. There would be something of the I'm just writing my novel, and I don't think that's healthy.
Right.
But anyway, your question. Back to your
I
question.
suppose two things: what actress, and also can you tell people that might not have read it a bit about this amazing?
Sure.
Character,
So the answer is so I am in a family of tall women. So I am the shortest member of my family. I'm touching 6 foot, but my 13-year-old daughter towers over me, and my wife towers over her. So I wanted, Goody was always this, this big figure. I didn't want her to be a kind of typically pretty or normal-looking heroine. I wanted her to be something that didn't fit in the world, and particularly where, I was reading a lot of memoirs and historical books about 18th century, particularly women's lives in the 18th century, and everything was so constrained, and it was physically constrained. Even the clothes, everything was so sort of bound up, and in terms of what they could achieve as women, it was so. And so I wanted to have this person who had physical strength, but found it difficult to, she found it incredibly difficult to fit in the way that her family and the social world that she was from expected of her. I've had a complete lacuna because the actress who is Gwendolyn, the very tall actress who is in...
Gwendolyn Riley.
Is it Gwendolyn Riley?
Who was in
Game of Thrones.
Oh, right.
Okay, good. So what is the author who wrote a brilliant novel? What is her name?
Oh, sorry, it's Gwendolyn Christie.
Gwendolyn Christie. Okay.
Gwendolyn Riley's the author.
Gwendolyn Riley's a really great author, and that was
whose
whose name I was going to do. No, you're
Thank
absolutely
you.
right. So thank you for answering both the questions in my head. So Gwendolyn Christie, who is, if you don't know her, she's Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones, and she's enormous and she's imposing, and so that was the image I had in my mind. But Goody in the novel is only 16 when the book opens, and so it would not. So we're actually we're down to several, but they're all relatively unknown. The actors that we're looking for.
So it'll be a series, or
it's going to be series 8-parter, 8-hour-long episodes, which is really good because it's a. So again, thinking about the things I like to do in books. So this starts off with Goody in this constrained world. She's the daughter of the Doctor of Winchelsea. He has sort of social aspirations. He finances those social aspirations through effectively helping the smugglers, because if you've been to Winchelsea, you may have been on a cellar tour. That Winchelsea has this kind of interesting honeycomb of cellars and tunnels beneath it that were put there when it was built. So Winchelsea, you had Matthew Green, who I'm doing an event with in Winchelsea, because he wrote brilliantly about the kind of factual history of Winchelsea. That old Winchelsea was about a mile out into the sea, as it is now, and was on a spit of land that was completely swept away. And so it was rebuilt, but it was rebuilt during a period where Britain had enormous links with France, and particularly with Aquitaine. And it was a bastide town. So the bastide town, New York is a bastide town, set out in grids like that. But it was also a wine importing town. It was the main wine importing town of Britain. And so all of the houses had these very immense cellars underneath them, and tunnels joining some of the cellars. And I once went down one of the tunnels as far as I could get, and it wasn't not being able to get any further that stopped me going any further. It was being absolutely terrified that stopped me going any further. And so the novel opens with Goody, 16-year-old, expected to go to to balls and to make a wonderful wife for someone, and all she wants to do is roam around wildly in this extraordinary place. Because the other thing that really struck me, and I was writing about this for the Observer, I think this weekend, maybe weekend after next. Just read a wonderful book which I so recommend to you, and I hope you haven't read it yet, because I want it to be like a gift I'm giving to you. When you love a book and you're recommending it, feels like giving someone such a present. James Hines' Sparrow. Have you read it yet?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful, and it is set. The conceit, the idea behind it, is the life of the last Roman. So the fall of Rome. And then you have who was the last Roman alive, and it turns out to be it's a fictional book. It turns out to be this boy called Sparrow who is ending his life in a library somewhere in the wilds of Britain, having lived this extraordinary life. It absolutely blew me away. Anyway, what I was writing about in my review of it was the way that I think the further back in time you go, the more the generic divide between historical fiction and science fiction begin to blur and meld, and that the skills you need as an author are as much world creation as they are world replication. So you need to be, and that's very much why is that? Because you have so much less to go on, and because even the world itself was so different, and the assumptions that people have in their heads, but also the thing that struck me was just the natural world, the number of birds in the sky, the number of plants, that we are living in a degraded time when it comes to all of that. And so I wanted to summon up this magical prior world where the birds were the sky was thick with birds, and the nature of the world just came in much more.
Yeah, a lot of novelists don't know birds. You mention a fieldfare, and that's part of the atmosphere. The book is very atmospheric, and you use nature a lot, don't you, to get that atmosphere. There's a pagan feel as well. There's a bit where Goody knows something's going to happen before it happens, and there is a I don't know, would it be the same if Winchelsea was still there? So you use nature and the sea as well. Can you tell us about that scene in the autumn garden? Because I love that's one of the many very unusual, really evocative things. Do you remember when she goes into the garden and it's autumn and she sort of gets power, and
Yes,
turning
okay.
point.
Yeah, I'm really interested by the description as pagan, because I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think that's exactly right. I think one of the things I wanted to get in touch with was that sort of green man energy, the sense of, and I think that is very reflective of my experience of coming down here from the city. So I mean, it's been 7 years now, but this sense of the power and the energy and the life force that I draw from, sounding very much like our King Charles now, aren't I? But no, this real sense that there is something that you get from immersion in nature that goes beyond things that we can explain.
There are phrases, those of you who read it will remember, like the sound of the night wind, that are really evocative, that you don't get with a lot of novelists. And a lot of novelists don't mention, for instance, a bird species or nature much. So
But it, like, you know, as I'm sure there are always writers in the audience here, but you know, we all know that it is in the specific that the real magic of novels lies, that it is in naming things, and it almost doesn't matter whether the reader knows the thing or not. And one of the things I love doing, and this is so one of those kind of revealing your cheat code, but the thing that I found hugely useful when writing this book, when particularly creating the language of this book, was the OED's historical thesaurus, which enables you to put in a modern word and it will give you a timeline of words that were used instead of it through time. And it's amazing if you're wanting to get an accurate language for that time, and particularly if, you know, I mean, and so the other thing you can do, you then can feed the novel back into it, and you can obviously see if there's anything that you used that is anachronistic. So there were words that were sort of sitting on the fence that I left in, but there were a lot of words that I cut out that felt like they should be of the era but weren't. So I wanted it to be authentic in terms of the language.
Yeah, it's not like one of those Hammer horror sort of period picks.
Thank you.
The herbalism, herbalism. You researched the herbalism a lot.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, you know, what a pleasure. I mean, if you're going to write a novel, isn't it just wonderful to spend like 3 weeks researching herbalism? That was one of my favourite periods. And there's a woman called Jekka McVicker who is a gardener, but she specifically gardens with herbs. And so I read her book, and then I actually went to visit her place in, I think it's in Gloucestershire, where she grows these amazing herbs, and just understanding the ways that they've been used through time, and the overlapping of what we think of as modern medicine and these more ancient forms of medicine, and the way that that we're recognising that some of them actually, you know, were useful cures for one reason or another.
Yeah, the words in there. You don't bother to explain a lot of them, which I quite like. And I wondered if, like Shakespeare, you made up. There's a few words like excited, compassionated, unkilted, which you know what they mean when you read them, but it's an argot that.
No, so that they all absolutely. I was sort of checking them as I went along, and a lot of what that will be, I'm afraid, is me on OED historical thesaurus.
But they bring you up short, make you hear her voice.
Yeah, well, that was really important to me, was to give her a sense of to build her into a character who existed in the language she spoke, as well as that almost the way she was described was also done through the way she spoke.
Yeah, and the plot, I read one that's something like some person of good read saying the plot was far-fetched. I think we've all got in our lives the most extraordinary tangles of relationships, and we're not going to give anything away, but there are some extraordinary tangles that you would never predict in this. Haven't we all got that? Do you think it's at all far-fetched?
I mean, interestingly, somebody told me that they thought that the ending was really was not believable. The ending is literally just a mapping of the historical record of what happened. So there's something called the book ends with the Battle of Goudhurst, which, if you know the people been to Goudhurst, it's a lovely place, little village in the Weald. It's got a church, so if you do go there, the church has got, you can see kind of battlements along the top of it. It's got crenellations, and there was this enormous battle in Goudhurst between the Hawkhurst gang and a group of local farmers. And anyway, again, not to give it away, but it does seem slightly ridiculous and extraordinary. But it was also, you know, you again, you light upon these stories and you want to tell them. No, in terms of Goody's life, I sort of set my characters going, and they find their own way. So whether it is far-fetched or not, it was what she told me to have her do, and so it's.
Did you ever dream about them?
Oh, with my dreams, book dreams are the best dreams.
That's interesting, because some writers say, they're almost offended if I ask.
Oh, no.
Sebastian Falk, to my surprise, because he's very sort of posh and uptight, his brother's a judge, said, "Oh yes, that's where most of the plot development."
Yeah, 100%.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
No,
I've spoken. I interviewed him at Chalk Valley History Festival a few years ago, and we talked about exactly this. And yeah, it is it's absolutely a source of. Well, only because, you know, it's so arrogant to think that we control these things, and there is so much depth and action going on within the head when our minds are elsewhere or asleep or whatever. And so to me, no, it is always incredibly important that I like the first thing I do if I'm stuck or struggling, I go out for a walk, I let my mind go elsewhere, and the stuff carries on going. And I'm working on my next novel at the moment, and I'm finding that I'm having these gaps between, because I'm, you know, publicising this novel, and the gaps are really fruitful, and I come back to it and I'm like, oh, of course, that's what happened next. And that's so, you know, it is the subconscious is the engine. You are just the you know, you're the typewriter.
But did the editor come and say to you, why have you got different voices for Goody? What, that's improbable, that's not politically correct?
We had a sensitivity read, which is
that like an intimacy coordinator?
It is. It's sort of the opposite, I think. So we had somebody read it because, you know, it was. I mean, I think we're still kind of in the white heat of the trans debate, but Goody cross-dresses. Goody cross-dresses for reasons of power rather than for reasons of gender identity. It's a sense of being in a position where she could not act in a way that enabled her to express any power, and then putting on male clothes immediately transformed that. And it was very much based, for me, there was a woman called Hannah Snell in the 18th century who ended up becoming a really heroic soldier, for the firstly against Bonnie Prince Charlie, and then in India, and was wounded in the groin at the Battle of Pondicherry. And it was only then that it was discovered that she had been a woman all the time. Wow. But we had a sensitivity reader because there was a concern that it was straying into territory that would get me into trouble, and that, you know, even that I was writing about from the perspective of a 16-year-old young woman was something that I think gave people heebie-jeebies in an age where writers have to only write about their own experience, which is not realistic, and would be so boring if it was me writing about myself.
So I loved it because I've got my daughter who's never wanted to wear dresses, and always had to make her. She only wears dresses at weddings, and was so really was Goody-esque. There was a Ladybird book of women pirates as well. I don't know whether you know about all those women pirates.
Yeah, Anne Bonny and Mary.
So you really enjoyed writing it, I guess.
Loved writing it.
Do you think that's a bit of a litmus test for a book that's going to resonate with people?
I think it really is. That I think that I think the thing that happened with this book was that I loved writing it so much I absolutely didn't care whether it did well or not. I absolutely didn't care whether the reviews came in, and I've never felt that about a book before.
Yes.
And I also I have found, Ian McEwan said that he didn't like publicising a book because he felt as if he was in the employ of a previous master, that it was this sense of you've already moved on to the next thing. And I really don't, you know, despite the fact that I'm writing my next novel, and Canongate sort of wanted a follow-up to this, but I'm doing something totally different. But this book is still so strong in my mind, and it's still so, I'm still so fond of it. And it was the most fun to write.
You talk creative writing, you don't anymore, is that
No.
right? Has it helped you not being maybe in academia?
I think that a mixture of just the time being freed up, but also being able to think outside a kind of a prescribed way of doing things. I sort of feel like academics would read this and think it was probably not quite serious enough.
Or schlock or something.
Yeah. And you know what? I wanted to have fun with it.
Yeah, because you mentioned there's a line in the book actually, the seriousness of the university professor that somebody has. So yeah, Goody, Francis, Baldock, there's such characters. Arthur Gray did some of them exist?
Yeah, Arthur Gray absolutely existed.
Because he is quite alluring at times. He's annoying, you know, dashing.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I mean, if you read his, what we know of him, I actually only found this out after I'd written the novel, but it's a good, it's one of those points where you sort of wish you'd made something of it at the time. That Arthur Gray, who was the head of the Hawkhurst gang, he was so wealthy in the 1740s that he began building a house which, it was like something from Gormenghast or something, that it was to be one of the largest private houses in the country, just this enormous stately pile just outside of Hawkhurst called Seacock's Heath. And of course it was so vast that after he died nobody was able to keep it heated or even completed, and so it, you know, burnt down. On that site now is Vladimir Putin's country place in the UK, which currently, you'll be glad to know, has a whole host of Ukrainian flags in the grass outside the entrance. Yeah.
And lastly, I just want to ask you, we must let people ask questions and mustn't argue, but that section by the Chevalier, you said Pamela, somebody in Scotland, gave you that section? How did that?
Yeah, her name wasn't Pamela. I'm going to have to remind myself what her name was. She's dead now.
It was like Chateaubriand's memoirs.
No, it's brilliant. Her name was Philippa Grant.
Sorry,
yes.
Yeah.
So we went up to. I'd wanted to get. I found the story of Bonnie Prince Charlie just so incredibly evocative. The whole King Across the Water, and I discovered a link between the smugglers and the Jacobites, and this is absolutely the time when this is all happening. If you know where East Grinstead is, West Grinstead, which is just beside that, was the seat of a family called the Carrolls, who were a Catholic family, who were basically financed just about the whole of the Jacobite rebellion, and they got a lot of their money from smuggling. So that was one of those things that I was like, oh wow, must build this in. But also I went to, I also had this story of Hannah Snell, who had gone up to fight in the uprising. But we went up to Scotland and we went to this place, and it was just this absolutely magical experience. There's this place called Lough Island, where there is a castle on the middle of an island in the middle of a loch, and it's a ruined castle. And this lady, Philippa Grant, said to me, oh, well, there was a Jacobite who hid out there for a year after the uprising failed. And she said, and he wrote a wonderful memoir, and gave it to me. And it is, it's really good as well. It's properly good. And he loved the prince so much, and he lived on this island in a kind of state of nature, sort of beating his breast at the fact that they hadn't managed to succeed. So I just was like, well, I want that in my novel.
It's partly what makes it cinematic. I think all those voices are fantastic. I think that and Lessons in Chemistry, we interviewed the author of recently. The two books I just recommend all sorts of people.
Oh,
and
thank you.
anyone.
Well, I hope mine
really
sells as
enjoyed
many
it.
as lessons in chemistry.
I mean, I'm afraid you don't want to hear this, but I was finishing this off in a public toilet somewhere, so I had to finish it as I went into the cafe, and the light goes off.
Oh, no, I do want to hear that. That's exactly the right.
The ultimate
missing the train. You know, all of that. That's always good.
I had to wave my arms around twice to finish it. Anyway, enough of that. Let's have some questions from these good people. Thank you all for coming. Has anyone got any questions about anything? Writing, the book. What's it like to be Alex Preston? Why did he drive all the way from Rye? Oh, yes.
I'd like to ask you again about Seacox Heath, which has just been mentioned.
Sure.
So, having explored Winchelsea both above and below ground, I can see how that translates into a novel perfectly. But how did you build your image of Seacox Heath? Presumably it's all closed to the public, yeah?
It is absolutely close to the public, and by the way,
Why
don't
is it close?
because it's Putin stature.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It's razor wire all along the top of it. Of course, it's a different house now. So that house burnt down. What I did was I went to, I think I got them in Lewis Library, which is, by the way, brilliant. If anyone, I imagine there's similar around here, but it was amazing. And I got the architectural plans for the design of the original house, and I got an engraving that was done of it, in which it looks finished, but actually it was almost, I mean, it was still kind of just a shell, even when Arthur Gray died. So he was all about trying to make something magnificent, and he didn't really seem to want to live there at all. He spent most of his time in the pub in Rye rather than up at Seacox Heath. But there's a wonderful engraving, and it looks absolutely mad. The kind, it looks like a vast Palladian mansion in Rome, rather weirdly placed on this hill in Sussex.
So would it have been the most expensive place in South East England, do you think?
I think it would have been the large. I mean, I guess probably at the time. Although of course you had all sorts of people with a lot of money in this part of the world. You also had incredibly rich smugglers. So the sea salter gang who operated around here, when the chief of the sea salter gang died, they were a little bit later. So he was because they were very much about the trade going into London and round this part of the coast. When he died in 1818. His total wealth was estimated it would be about £50 million today. So these were people, again, this idea of a poldark kind of making a little bit here and there. They were vast enterprises.
That lady had questions.
When you write, do you give yourself, say, an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, or do you just write and then stop when it feels right?
I would love the answer is I would love to be as programmatic as that, but I think the thing I feel still is that writing has to be a necessity, and it has to feel like a necessity, and you have to feel as when you're not writing, it has to feel like something's wrong. And so when I am writing, when I am in that period of creativity, I try and write all the time I can. Mm-hmm. But I have a busy life and, what do we call it now, a portfolio career, where I'm writing for, 4 different newspapers, and I'm doing, some ghostwriting for somebody else, and I have, so I have to fit it in around those other obligations. And so what I have tended to do and still do is try and find time in the evenings. That tends to be when, again, this sense of something magical and dreamlike that descends when the house is quiet, when it's dark outside, and when you're sitting at the desk or in your favourite chair, and I would much rather have a few hours of that than trying to squeeze it in bits and bobs, because I do think the best writing comes when you enter this state of flow, when you enter something where you don't feel fully in control of what you're doing.
That must be quite late. You've got children and everything.
Yeah,
Those nights.
yeah. I mean, I tend to write sort of 9 till 11 or 12. So it's and then what I'll do, the first thing I'll do in the morning is look at what I've done the night before, edit it, take little notes to myself. I find that quite useful. But it's that sense of the morning mind is good at the sort of logical stuff, and the night mind is the dream.
Fantastic. You had a question, sir.
Yeah, Marx's book, Mr. Nice Guy, he pushed this idea he was a facilitator, he just helps people out. You know. Do you think he's a pretty morally reprehensible guy?
Well, I haven't read it, but I guess I would try and have a more nuanced view of it. I absolutely take Martin's point that we're, the whole sort of Escobar fetishization is just bizarre to me, that these were monsters who killed people, and the drug trade is something that clearly wrecks a lot of lives. I also just think, the world is a complex and a difficult place where there are people who do awful things. I think one of the sort of activating impulses behind the book was wanting to tell the story of, or to tell a truth about these men and how awful they were, and to push back against that popularized Daphne du Maurier image. I mean, I guess they're kind of unpleasant in Jamaica but certainly the way that Cornwall has sort of cozied the idea of the smuggler. I think they were awful people.
I think you.
Yeah. Sorry. How much research went into this book in terms of time, and is there a danger writing historical fiction of over research?
Yeah, I think always a danger with a book of over researching, only because there's this sort of there's this sense, even if it's a subconscious sense, that I've done the work, I need to put it in there, I need to find a way. And I'm a big believer in that Hemingway's iceberg thing, but he said 90% of the research doesn't make it onto the page, but it gives heft and weight and solidity to the 10% that you do show. And I did a lot of research for this. Maybe I did too much, but because I was enjoying it so much, and because I went and spent 3 weeks looking at herbs, but I think in the end, there always feels like a very natural point at which you start the writing, and it's when the research is coming out of your ears. Yeah. So I would say I probably researched, it was probably 3 years I spent doing the reading, the visiting of places, the really immersing myself, and a lot of it, there's whole, chapters, hundreds of pages that were written that never got in there, but that still, again, give weight to the stuff that is it. So no writing you ever do is wasted.
That's interesting.
And how much time did you actually spend in Winchelsea during the...
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I live 15 minutes away from Winchelsea, so no, that was fine. And actually, the people of Winchelsea, having been, I think, a little bit, they're not the most welcoming, and I think they would accept that of themselves. And they've really taken the book to their heart and have been wonderful about it. And but actually going into the cellars, and anyone, had you been to the cellars?
No.
But you know of them.
No.
Well, no, but I'm almost glad, because so we're doing an event on the Bank Holiday Monday of the coronation where I'm talking in some of the cellars, and if anyone has read the book, in the cellars, they're this vast warren of interconnecting tunnels and complex, doors going out on the side. And actually, if you go to them, they're a bit rubbish. They're atmospheric, because of course they were the spark that actually, weirdly, with the Weird Stone of Brisingamen, which is, if anyone has read it, there's all these mines underneath the kind of Cheshire hills, yes, it was a lot of time spent in that place, and a lot of a sense of trying to establish what makes it a special, because it is a special landscape. Like Rye and Winchelsea are extraordinary places, kind of rising out of the marshes, a real sense of history being closer to the surface than it is elsewhere, although it's quite close here as well.
Anybody else? Yes.
I very much enjoyed reading this.
Thank you.
As someone who's been a teacher and supply teacher since 1971, I really enjoyed a passage of the alternative narrator who says, "I had no talent, being neither farmer nor craftsman nor notary, and so it was that I found myself teaching." There we are.
Oh, well, I mean, having taught myself, yes, exactly. But we recognise that he's an extremely good egg, the narrator of that section. My favourite to write, actually.
Great. Is there another traditional last question? Yes, madam.
Yes, I loved the book, absolutely. It was just so evocative. I could smell it, I
Yeah,
could see
me
it,
too.
I could feel the dark, I could hear the birds. It was, and I dreamt about it.
Oh, good.
And I, you know, about dreaming about the plot lines, but and I love the agency of Goody. I was there. I was with her on the boat. So my question really is actually, because I am a sailor, how did you go about researching all the kind of sailing?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yes.
I mean, again,
I was kind of looking at it thinking,
huge amount of fun. I thought that I needed to be a sailor to do it, and I am not a sailor. And so I went and had sailing lessons in Rye. I am not a sailor still, honestly. But what I did do was, in that period, I met a proper sailor, and he's a kind of, amazing old sea dog who sort of hangs around at the Rye Sailing Club. And I just started talking to him, and I actually interviewed him a few times, and then he very kindly offered to read some of the book. I then gave it, because it's absolutely one of the things that you can't get wrong, because there are so many experts who will pick you up on this stuff. I then gave it, there's a lovely book that actually I don't think it did as well as it ought to have done. I think it's called The Sea Book, and it's like a sort of Shots miscellany of the sea by a guy called Chris Clothier and Meg Clothier, who's got a great book out at the moment called The Book of Eve, I think it's called. But anyway, he then read the book for cover to cover for nautical mishaps, making sure that I didn't get anything wrong, and making sure that the cleats were in the right place, and yeah, so it was a bit I loved going out. Went out on a few sort of the era sailboats, and just a magical feeling.
Wow.
really evocative.
I'd like to thank Inez bin Khalifa over there, who's filmed this, and it will be on YouTube soon if you want any of your friends who couldn't make it to watch it. And I think, this hour, the cleats have definitely been in the right place. I don't want it to finish. Alex has got a long drive. He's going to sit there and sell the book. And